If you work with children with autism, you cannot miss this episode. We are going to discuss a very important phenomenon that is rarely, if ever, discussed, unfortunately, in the field of speech pathology. Understanding this phenomenon and how you can take advantage of this superpower is going to be of great benefit to you in your therapy today. If you work with children with autism, if you know a child with autism, make sure to watch this episode. It will make you more effective at the work you do. Now, what we're going to talk about is known as synesthesia. Now, synesthesia is basically two different perceptions combine when you're perceiving something. Let me give you a little bit of background. Syn is Greek for union, and aesthesia is their sensations. So you're actually combining two different sensations. Now, when it comes to autism spectrum conditions, they tend to combine grapheme and color. This is known as grapheme color synesthesia. Grapheme color synesthesia is basically when they see a grapheme, a symbol, it can be a letter, it can be a number, it can be a shape, they're either going to project a color, so they're going to see a color right on top of that, like maybe it's the color green, or they're going to associate it with a color. They're going to think about the color green when they see this letter, shape, or number. For instance, if you say the letter E, or if you see the letter E, they might put green on top of the letter E every time they see it. Or if they see a square, maybe that square has green on top of it every time they see it. Or if it's the number 4, maybe the color green is on top of the 4 every time they see it. Now, this condition is relatively rare in the general population. It's about 1 to 3%. However, when we move into the population of individuals with autism, we're looking at a number as high as 15 to 20%. A lot of this research is on adolescent change and above because they're able to describe what they're processing and how they're processing it in these experiments and to show over time that they're reliable. Nonetheless, of individuals with autism, having this type of synesthesia in which when they see a grapheme, it could be a letter, a number, a shape, a symbol, they associate that with a specific, this grapheme color synesthesia is going to be something as a superpower that we're going to want to take advantage of. And we're going to say that because we know that children with autism, they learn better if you incorporate their interest. So if they have an interest in letters, numbers, shapes, colors, capitalize on that. Take advantage of that, incorporate it into the therapy. We also know for children with autism that they tend to have a relative strength in visual processing skills, with many studies showing that their visual processing skills are either equal to or even superior to their peers. So, what we're going to want to do in therapy is we're going to want to capitalize on that and using a multimodal system in which we're always taking that visual and we're pairing it with other modes of communication, perhaps the auditory, the motor, which is more challenging for the child with autism. We want to pair that so that that makes greater sense. Now, the third thing we know about children with autism is we also know that they tend to have equal skills when it comes to letter identification, number identification, shape identification, color identification. So this is a strength for children with autism, this grapheme symbol. What we want to do is integrate that strength when it comes to teaching new and other concepts. This is very important because what I want to challenge you to do is to think from a neurodiversity paradigm, which is not a one size fits all. So, one size fits all thinking is very prescriptive, and you see a lot of this on social media in which you'll see someone, for instance, on a reel or in a carousel saying, don't use colors, shapes, numbers, letters at the preschool level. That is not developmental. And it's like instead use social language such as more, help, blah, 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 blah. However, doing so would be very disadvantageous if you're working with children with autism. So if you're not going to capitalize on their superpower, if you're not going to capitalize on their interest, if you're not going to capitalize on an area of strength for them and taking a strengths-based approach, you're not being progressive in your thinking. Instead, you are being anti-neurodiverse. You're saying, well, everyone should learn in this certain way that I term is developmental and is appropriate for children who are neurotypical. And you must fit in this manner, and this is the way that we teach, regardless of who we're working with. So I really want you to take a wide angle lens when it comes to children with autism, and you really have to not get sucked in to the bandwagon thinking. And the bandwagon thinking is very pervasive today. I would be interested in doing research on speech pathologists and how many of speech pathologists get their information from social media and how to do practice. And if that's the case, they're not touching letters, shapes, numbers, colors with a 10-foot pole. It's not evidence-based practice. It's emotional-based practice. It's because an influencer said so. The problem with that is if you get on this bandwagon, you're going to lose this wonderful opportunity that you have to reach them, to connect with them, to capitalize on their strengths. This is a time where it's so important, like the Bhagavad Gita says, to be discerning, to approach your practice like a swan. You swallow the milk, you swallow what nourishes, and you spit out the dirt, and that's going to change depending on who you're working with and on that moment in time. What I'm going to encourage you to do is to capitalize on these visual processing skills, capitalize on these interests and letters, shapes, numbers, colors. Jump on that bandwagon. See how far you go with that. Capitalize on visual processing skills in the children with autism, showing strong literacy skills and symbols of related letter and number knowledge. Capitalize on those strengths. Incorporate it not just once, but many times. And when you do that, you do it in a multimodal manner in which you're taking those numbers and those letters and those shapes and those colors, you're pairing it with movement, and you're pairing it with speech, and you're pairing it with auditory processing. You're pairing it with those areas that we know children with autism struggle with. We're taking their strengths and we're pairing it with a new area so that we can build bridges. We are going to integrate that into therapy. And we're going to integrate it into therapy, not just by accident. It's going to be planned. A lot of people are like, oh, you should have no agenda. You should walk into therapy and you should simply follow the child's lead. There should be no goals set. That's not what the research supports. The research supports that you've gone behind the scenes. You've created a task-oriented movement therapy activity that's educationally rich. And then because you've done that, you can be present with the child. You can respond to the child, their sensory needs. You can respond to their interests. You can be attuned to the child. And you can provide them with an educationally rich learning activity that you've developed behind the scenes that capitalizes on their strengths. That's what best practice looks like. There's a lot of work and thought that comes in behind the scenes so that you can be present. When we're looking at that, there's two things that I want to emphasize in working with preschoolers. First off, many of the children I work with, their first words are the alphabet, are the numbers, are the colors, are the shapes, and that is great. Because when they develop consistency in using those words across settings, across individuals, is when that consistency of motor planning, motor programming, motor execution develops, because a lot of the speech delay is related oftentimes to a motor delay. Then you have the momentum going. You have this child that has learned to ride the bike. After that, the words start flowing in. The new vocabulary words start flowing in. The generalization to novel concepts, to novel experiences. How did we get there? We got there by capitalizing on their interests. We got there by capitalizing on their strengths. We got there by capitalizing on their visual processing skills. So what we're doing is the opposite of what these bandwagon influencers would tell you to do. You need to be discerning. You need to be discerning if you're working with children with autism, or you're not going anywhere. Number one. Number two, I think it's very important to understand this synesthesia, because synesthesia is not a disorder, it's a superpower. And number two, you're going to take those concepts and you're going to incorporate them into the task-oriented movement therapy activities. So like I do with my SIS membership, it's incorporated. What do these children have challenge with? It's known as goal-oriented behavior. It's known as taking your entire whole body and using it in space to accomplish a goal. It's fine motor. So what we're doing, it's motor, 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 and we're not going to get to speech, which develops lastly, which is a distal skill, till after we've developed the core, until after we develop the gross, until after we develop the fine. Then we're going to get these complex fine motor skills of gestures, of speech development. How are we going to get there? We're going to incorporate the visual. We're going to incorporate the visual on the signs that we have, where children are to go, for what their purpose is. We're going to incorporate the visual for the checklist. We're going to incorporate the visuals for the mission. We are going to use the visuals as a way of multimodally improving those foundational skills that are necessary for independent functioning in this world, so that they are not locked in. We're going to capitalize on those visual so that these children can develop their core, their gross motor, their fine motor, their goal-oriented whole body use to accomplish goals in space independently, to develop speech. And every task-oriented movement therapy activity in our SIS membership, they capitalize on these strengths. They capitalize on synesthesia, because synesthesia is a superpower. And synesthesia is that bridge that can develop the other areas that are inherently challenging for children with autism. We do need to develop these foundational skills. These foundational skills, such as using your body in a goal-oriented manner to accomplish tasks, are necessary prerequisites before children can develop complex play skills. Now, these play skills, this is the language that children speak to communicate with one another. So a lot of our children with autism, they are locked in. And the key, now it's not just one single key, there are many different tunnels and locks, and it's a complex map, but we'll get there. But a key to getting there is taking advantage of the grapheme color synesthesia that many children with autism display. This is a superpower, and you're going to take that superpower and you're going to capitalize on it. And when you do, you're going to get exponentially greater gains than if you don't. I did find a treat in Lisbon. There was a comedian, Julio Torres, showing what different colors look like emotionally on his facial expressions. So I thought that was a really nice example of synesthesia that would make you laugh. And I linked it in my show notes here at the bottom of the page. That actually inspired this episode. I watched it, I thought about synesthesia, and I thought about just how important synesthesia is in our field and how we never discuss it. And I think a lot of times when you talk about something, when you start discussing it, is when you really get to grasp it, roll up your sleeves, put it into your work in an intentional, meaningful manner. On that note, I want you to roll up your sleeves and make the world a better place, one child at a time. You are always going to be